So today, we're looking at fire, but maybe not in the way you'd expect.
Right. Not through a firefighter's eyes.
Exactly. We're looking at it like a prosecutor would. We've got some legal codes, some infographics, all out of the Philippines.
And they reveal this really stark distinction in the law.
Yeah, it's like a burned down shed and a burned down shipyard exist in two totally different legal universes.
They absolutely do.
So our mission today is to figure out why and also how the state can prove you're guilty when, the evidence is literally turned to ash.
It's a fascinating legal puzzle. We're mainly diving into two sources here.
Yeah.
The revised penal code, specifically Article 320 and something called Presidential Decree 1613.
And these sources draw a really hard line.
A very hard line. It's between what the law calls destructive arson and simple arson.
And that word destructive, it's not just for drama, is it?
Not at all. It's a very specific legal category reserved for what the state deems critical infrastructure.
So we're talking about things like military arsenals,
Wow.
shipyards.
Exactly. Places like that, or storehouses for explosives, even public utilities like a train or a plane. If you set fire to one of those, you've just entered the world of Article 320.
Because you're not just burning a building at that point.
You're attacking public safety, maybe even the national economy. It's seen as a strategic threat.
And the penalties reflect that, I assume.
Oh, absolutely. The penalty is reclusion perpetua, which is a life sentence, basically 20 to 40 years, all the way up to death.
Wow.
In fact, if the fire causes a death, the law mandates the death penalty. It is the ultimate do not touch sign.
That is a massive jump. But, most arson cases don't involve a military base.
No, of course not.
So what about a more relatable situation?
And that's where simple arson comes in. It's defined under that other law, PD 1613.
The catch-all category.
It's the catch-all, yeah. It covers inhabited houses, industrial buildings, even agricultural land like a rice plantation. The focus there is more on protecting private property and individual lives.
Okay, but here's something that I found. Well, honestly, a bit surprising. You can be charged with arson for burning your own property.
That's the one that trips people up.
You'd think, it's my house, my rules, right?
You would think that. But your right to your property ends where the danger to someone else's begins. If your fire threatens your neighbor's house or their life, the law steps in.
It's all about malicious intent and the danger you create.
Exactly. But proving that intent, that's the hard part, isn't it? When the whole crime scene is a pile of charcoal.
So how do they do it?
Well, the law has to rely on what's called prima facie evidence.
Which is basically
Yeah.
legal speak for red flags, right? Things that just look suspicious.
Perfect way to put it. They create a legal presumption of guilt, and then the burden is on you to prove it was an accident.
And one of those red flags isn't even at the scene of the fire. It's in the paper trail.
The money trail.
Yeah, the insurance. Like,
Yeah.
say you have a shed worth, what, $10,000? But you've somehow insured it for $1 million. And then, poof, goes up in smoke. The law sees that as a huge red flag.
A massive one. Under Section 6 of the decree, that overinsurance is considered prima facie evidence of arson.
It's not just the money, though.
No. Investigators also look for what they call simultaneous starts.
Meaning?
If a fire breaks out in the kitchen, the bedroom, and the garage all at the exact same time, that's not a faulty wire. That's a plan.
And I imagine they look for accelerants, too.
Of course. Finding traces of gasoline or kerosene in the middle of a living room is like finding the smoking gun, even after the fire's out.
It just has no business being there.
None at all. And these markers let the state build a case, even when the classic fingerprints are long gone.
It all just really highlights how the law thinks about risk, from something huge like a shipyard down to something as small as an inflated insurance policy.
It's all about protecting the public from a crime that is, by its very nature, designed to destroy its own evidence.
So we've seen how the law uses these red flags to establish intent. But as we wrap up, here's a thought to leave you with. In a world of ever-improving forensic science, where is the line between a tragic accident and a legally presumed crime, especially when the evidence itself is literally reduced to dust? It makes you wonder how much we can ever truly know once the smoke clears.
Hey everyone, and welcome. You know, we see it on the news all the time, right? Massive fire breaks out downtown, or something like historic landmark destroyed in a blaze. But behind all that smoke and the screaming sirens, there's this really important legal question, and that's exactly what we're going to get into today. So you see a building burning. Your gut reaction? It's probably a tragedy, a terrible loss. But for the folks in law enforcement, for the investigators, the very first question they ask is, was this just a horrible accident or was it a crime? And let me tell you, the answer to that question, it changes absolutely everything. So how does the law draw that line? You might think it's about, how big the fire is or how much the damage costs, but nope, it's not. It all boils down to one single crucial element. And that one thing, it's all about intent. The legal world has a name for it, of course. Arson. It's the malicious and intentional act of setting fire to property. I mean, think about it. It's the huge difference between, say, a faulty electrical wire and someone showing up with a can of gasoline. One's a terrible accident, right? The other? That's a serious, serious crime. But this is where things get really interesting. See, the law doesn't just lump all arson together. It actually splits it into two totally different categories. And believe me, the severity between them is worlds apart. Okay, so on one side, you've got something called simple arson. This is pretty much what it sounds like. It's mostly about destroying property, like setting fire to someone else's empty shed. But then you have destructive arson, and this is a whole different beast. It is so much more serious because it's not just about the property anymore. We're talking about acts that put human lives in danger, that threaten the safety of the public on a huge scale. And honestly, if you take one thing away from this, it's understanding the difference between those two. Which, of course, brings up a pretty big question. What exactly pushes a fire from being simple arson into that much more serious category of destructive arson? Well, the law is super specific on this, and it really looks at two main factors. First up, the law looks at what actually got burned. I mean, setting fire to certain kinds of places is automatically seen as a massive danger to everyone, no matter what your reason was. And it's pretty wild how specific the law is here. We're talking about places where people gather, like a church or theater, or critical things like trains, ships, or airplanes. It also covers public utilities, military sites like an arsenal, and any factory that's storing stuff that's flammable or explosive. If you burn any of those, it's immediately destructive arson, simply because of the catastrophic risk to human life. But it's not just about the what. The law also takes a very, very close look at the why. Your motive, your reason for starting the fire, can also instantly turn it into a case of destructive arson. For example, if you burn anything to get insurance money, or to cover up another crime you committed, or to get out of paying your debts, that's destructive arson. Same thing if the fire was started just out of pure spite or hatred. Oh, and if the whole thing was planned and pulled off by a group of 3 or more people, a syndicate, the law treats that with the absolute most severity. These motives show a kind of criminal thinking that the law comes down on hard. Okay, so we've got the definitions down, but let's get practical. How do investigators actually show up to a smoldering scene and prove a fire was started on purpose? How do they sift through all that ash and find the proof they need? Well, they do it by looking for a very specific set of clues. You can think of them as legal red flags that basically scream, "Hey, this was no accident." And the law has a special name for this kind of evidence. It's called prima facie evidence. Yeah, it's a fancy Latin term, I know, but all it really means is at first sight. These are facts that are so suspicious all on their own that they create this powerful assumption that arson was committed. It's almost like an investigator's cheat sheet for spotting a deliberate fire. And this checklist gives you a perfect idea of what they're looking for. Did the fire start in a bunch of different places at the same time? That's a huge classic sign. Did they find traces of things like gasoline or kerosene? That's another major red flag. Other clues are more about money. Was the building insured for way, way more than it was actually worth? Or, did the owner just happen to move all their valuable stuff out right before the fire? And finally, if there was some kind of threat or demand for money beforehand, that also counts as prima facie evidence. And finding this kind of proof is absolutely vital because the penalties for being convicted of arson, especially destructive arson, are some of the most serious punishments in our entire legal system. We're not talking about a fine here or a couple of years in jail. The law uses a term, reclusion perpetua, which is basically life imprisonment, as the minimum starting point. And from there, the penalty for destructive arson can go all the way up to death. That alone tells you how seriously the system takes the act of setting a fire that puts the public at risk. And then, there's one scenario where there's just no gray area, no debate. If an act of destructive arson ends up killing someone, anyone, the penalty isn't maybe death. It is mandatory. The law could not be more clear on this. If your criminal fire takes a life, you pay with your own.
So you have to ask, why? Why is the law so harsh here? Why this incredibly stark line? Well, it's because a fire that's set on purpose, it's a weapon unlike almost any other. Once you let it go, it's completely uncontrollable. It doesn't care about the difference between a building and a person, between who you're targeting and who's just an innocent bystander. It doesn't just destroy stuff. It consumes lives, it spreads panic, and it threatens the very fabric of a safe society. And that is a threat the law simply will not tolerate.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are staring directly into the fire.
And you mean that quite literally.
I do. We're looking at one of the most chemically simple, yet legally terrifying phenomena out there.
Combustion.
Fire.
It really is deceptive, isn't it? Chemically, it's just rapid oxidation, heat, fuel, oxygen, simple high school science.
Right.
But the second you apply that reaction to a building or, say, a train or even a bamboo grove.
Well, the Philippine legal system suddenly has a tremendous amount to say about it.
A tremendous amount is putting it lightly. I mean, I was looking at the stack of documents we pulled for this, and my desk is literally groaning under the weight.
It's a lot.
We're not just looking at one statute here. We are looking at a tapestry, a labyrinth of legal texts.
It's a bit of a maze, yeah.
You've got the revised penal code, which is kind of the grandfather of the system. Then there's Presidential Decree 1613, which specifically amends the law on arson.
And PD 1744. Right, and then we have the real heavy hitter, Republic Act 7659, which some people might know as the death penalty law. I know that one carries a lot of historical baggage, and we are definitely going to get into exactly what the text says about it later on.
We will. And the reason we have this whole stack, this layering of decrees on top of codes, on top of acts, is because arson isn't viewed as a single monolithic crime. It's a shapeshifter.
How so?
The law treats I burned down a shed very, very differently from I burned down a hospital, and it treats both of those differently from, say, I burned down my own house for the insurance payout.
And that is our mission today. We are going to decode that difference between simple property damage and what the law classifies as a heinous crime. We're going to look for the specific legal the red flags that investigators use to prove a fire wasn't just bad luck. Because, and this is something I learned going through these papers, the law actually presumes certain things are arson until you prove otherwise, which honestly is a kind of a scary thought.
It's a very powerful legal concept called prima facie evidence. But before we get to the detective work, we have to set the scene.
Okay.
To understand arson in the Philippine context, you have to understand the philosophy behind these laws. We're not just talking about losing money or, bricks and mortar. The sources we have treat arson as a crime against public safety and, in some cases, even national security.
So let's imagine we are in a law library. The lights are dim. Maybe there's a flickering candle somewhere.
Safely contained, of course.
Of course. Where do we even begin to untangle all this?
We have to start at the baseline. We need to define the crime in its most basic, stripped-down form. In the legal world, this is generally referred to as simple arson.
Okay.
And the governing text here is primarily Presidential Decree number 1613.
Okay, I've got PD 1613 right here in front of me. I'm looking at Section 1, and it seems deceptively straightforward. It just says, any person who burns or sets fire to the property of another shall be punished by prison mayor.
Correct. That's the fundamental definition. You take a match, you apply it to something that isn't yours, and you destroy it. But let's just pause on that penalty for a second. Prison mayor.
It sounds fancy, almost regal.
It sounds nice until you translate it into time. Prison mayor generally runs from 6 years and 1 day, all the way up to 12 years.
Whoa. Okay, wait. Let's contextualize that.
Yeah.
If I go in when my kid is starting first grade, I might not get out until they're literally graduating high school.
That's right.
And that's for the simple version of the crime.
Exactly. That is the baseline. The law starts with a very heavy hand because fire is just inherently so dangerous. But then right underneath that, there's a second paragraph in Section 1 that often confuses people.
Yeah, this caught my eye. It says, you can be punished for setting fire to your own property. That just feels intuitively wrong.
Right.
If I bought it, if I own the deed, why can't I burn it? If I hate my sofa, why can't I just drag it into the backyard and torch it?
Well, you can destroy your own property, generally speaking. If you want to take a sledgehammer to your sofa, go for it. But fire is different. The law draws a very bright line when your actions threaten the community. Section 1 explicitly states that setting fire to your own property becomes a crime if it is done under circumstances which expose to danger the life or property of another.
Okay, let's play this out. If I live on a 10-hectare farm in the middle of nowhere and I decide to burn my own old shed and my nearest neighbor is like 5 kilometers away?
You're probably fine. There's no exposure to danger for anyone else.
But if I live in a townhouse in a crowded city, I own the townhouse. It's mine. But I decide to burn that same sofa, only this time it's in my living room.
Then you are absolutely committing a crime. Because in a townhouse, your wall is your neighbor's wall.
Right.
The operative phrase here is exposed to danger, and this is the crucial part. The fire doesn't even have to actually consume the neighbor's house.
Wait, really? So if I light the fire and my neighbor's house is totally fine in the end, I'm still on the hook?
You can be, yes, because the crime is the exposure to danger. The mere act of creating that uncontrollable beast fire in a dense environment is what triggers the criminal liability under simple arson.
Oh.
Fire is notoriously difficult to control. The wind shifts, a spark flies. The law penalizes the recklessness of exposing others to that probability, not just the final result.
That makes sense. It's a bit like driving drunk. Even if you don't actually hit anyone, the act of being on the road in that state is the threat itself.
That is a perfect analogy.
So that's our baseline, simple arson,
Yeah.
6 to 12 years. But as I kept reading through this stack, specifically when I got into RL 320 and the later amendments, the penalties started getting terrifyingly high. We moved from prison mayor to reclusion temporal and all the way up to reclusion perpetua, and even in the historical texts, death. This brings us to destructive arson.
And this is where the distinction is absolutely vital. Destructive arson isn't just simple arson plus. The law treats it almost as a different class of offense entirely because of the target.
The target, okay.
This was originally covered in Article 320 of the revised Penal Code. Then it was amended by PD 1744 and then amended again by RA 7659. The evolution of the law shows that the state takes this specific type of arson incredibly seriously.
Let's unpack that list of targets because it seems really, really specific. It's not just big buildings. The law has a laundry list of things that if you burn them, your life is effectively over.
It does. If you look at Article 320 as it's been amended, the first category is any ammunition factory and other establishment where explosives, inflammable, or combustible materials are stored.
Okay, that one feels obvious. You burn an ammo dump. You aren't just burning a building. You're basically creating a massive bomb. You're shelling the entire neighborhood.
Precisely. It's the potential for mass destruction and all the collateral damage. But then look at the very next category. It lists any archive, museum, whether public or private, or any edifice devoted to culture, education, or social services.
Now, that is interesting. So burning a museum is considered destructive arson with the absolute highest penalties. Why would a museum rank higher than, say, a generic Amazon warehouse that's full of expensive electronics? The electronics might be worth more actual money.
It really speaks to the value of what is being destroyed. It's not just about financial value. It's what we might call intergenerational theft.
Intergenerational theft. I like that term.
An archive contains the memory of a nation. A museum holds our cultural heritage. If you burn a warehouse full of TVs, we can just build more TVs. But if you burn a museum containing original manuscripts or priceless historical artifacts, that is gone forever.
You can't get it back.
You are stealing from the future by destroying the past. The law recognizes that the damage goes far beyond the physical structure. It strikes right at the identity of the society.
That gives me chills, actually. It's like it's treating history itself as a protected class.
In a way, it is.
Then we have the places where people gather, the textless churches, places of worship, and buildings where people congregate.
Congregate is the key word here. Hospitals, hotels, shopping centers, dormitories, theaters. The law lists these specifically. The intent here is so clearly about the risk to human life.
I mean, if you set fire to a movie theater, just think about the chaos.
A dark room, very limited exits, panic sets in immediately.
It's a nightmare scenario.
Exactly. The potential for catastrophe in that type of structure is so high that the law categorizes it as destructive arson regardless of the final outcome.
I noticed a really specific detail in that list that I want to drill down on. It mentions transient dwellings and public conveyances, and it explicitly lists trains, airplanes, and vessels.
Yes, this is all about vulnerability. Think about being a passenger on a train or a ship.
You're trapped.
You absolutely are. If a fire starts in your house, you can run out the door into the yard. If a fire starts on a ship in the middle of the ocean or a train moving at speed between stations, You have nowhere to go.
You're in a middle tube.
Or a floating box. The panic alone can kill people.
And transient dwelling, that's referring to hotels and things like that.
Hotels, motels, inns. Places where people are sleeping, but it's not their home. They don't know the layout. They don't know where the fire extinguisher is.
They don't know the escape routes by heart like they do in their own bedroom.
Exactly. That unfamiliarity makes them incredibly vulnerable. And PD 1744 and RA 7659 emphasize that burning these kinds of conveyances or dwellings carries a penalty of reclusion temporal and its maximum period all the way up to death.
So just to clarify reclusion temporal, we said prison mayor was 6 to 12 years. What are we looking at here?
Reclusion temporal is 12 years and 1 day, up to 20 years. And reclusion perpetua, well, that is effectively life imprisonment, usually 20 to 40 years, with no possibility of pardon for a very long time.
So we were talking about decades of your life just gone. Now, here's the part of destructive arson that really threw me for a loop. The sources suggest that for these buildings where people gather, like hotels or markets, there's this terrifying nuance.
You're referring to the occupancy status.
Yes. The law states that it does not matter if the offender even knew there were people inside. And it also doesn't matter if the building was actually inhabited at the time.
Correct.
Wait, let's really sit with that for a second. I want to build a scenario here. Let's say I'm an arsonist, but I have a code.
Right.
I don't want to hurt anybody. I want to burn down a shopping mall to make some kind of statement. But I wait until 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. I scout it out. I know for a fact the security guard is asleep in the other wing. I know it is empty. I burn it down. Nobody gets so much as a scratch.
You are still liable for destructive arson?
Even though I went out of my way to ensure no one was there.
Yes, because the law doesn't give you credit for your due diligence as a criminal. The act of targeting a structure that is designed for public gathering is considered so inherently dangerous and malicious that the outcome becomes secondary to the intent.
Wow.
You are attacking the public safety infrastructure itself.
Man, that's actually kind of terrifying. You're telling me I don't even need to know the mall is empty. I could think I'm being some sort of noble arsonist, avoiding casualties, and the judge still looks at me and says, maximum penalty.
Precisely. Because what if you were wrong? What if a janitor was working late? What if a homeless person was sleeping in the loading bay? Fire is unpredictable. The law punishes you for rolling the dice with human lives, even if the dice happen to come up in your favor that one time.
That really shifts the whole perspective from property damage to public threat. It's not about the bricks. It's about the audacity of the act itself.
Audacity is a very good word for it.
Okay, so we've defined the crime. We have simple arson, and we have the terrifying destructive arson. Now, let's move to the investigation side of things, because unlike, say, a stabbing or a shooting, fire has a tendency to destroy the evidence.
It does.
I think we've all seen the movies where the arson investigator walks into the wet ashes, sniffs the air, and just says, it was gasoline.
And the law actually codifies that kind of detective work. This is one of the most fascinating parts of Presidential Decree 1613. It lays out Section 6, which is titled Prima facie evidence of arson.
Prima facie. Let's just define that for anyone who's not a lawyer.
Yeah.
It means on its face, right? Or at first glance.
Legally, yes. It means evidence that is sufficient to establish a fact or raise a presumption unless it's disproved. So basically, in a normal criminal case, you are innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
But if the police find these specific things listed in Section 6, the burden of proof actually shifts. The law presumes it was arson, and now you, the accused, have to prove it wasn't.
That is such a powerful tool for prosecutors. It basically says, this looks so much like a duck and quacks so much like a duck that we're legally calling it a duck unless you can prove it's a chicken.
That's a very good way to put it.
So let's go through the list of these red flags. The first one is about simultaneous fires.
Yes, the text says, if the fire started simultaneously in more than one part of the building or establishment, this is just grounded in physics.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate for a second. What if I have really terrible wiring? Could a short circuit in the attic happen at the exact same time I accidentally drop a candle in the kitchen? Or is the law just saying that's statistically impossible?
It's not impossible, but the law deals in probabilities. And you have to think about how fire moves. It usually originates from a single point of origin, and it spreads out and up, creating that classic V pattern on the walls.
Right, the V shape. I've heard of that.
So if an investigator walks in and sees a clear V pattern in the kitchen and a totally separate, distinct V pattern in the master bedroom, and the hallway between them is completely unburned, Well, that defies the physics of natural fire spread.
Fire doesn't skip a room.
It doesn't teleport. Exactly. Two independent fires starting at the exact same moment. That's not bad luck. That's choreography. That is someone walking from room to room with a match.
Okay, I'm sold. Multiple origin points, equal intention.
Yeah.
What's the next red flag on the list?
The presence of accelerants. The law looks for a substantial amount of flammable substances or materials, not necessary in the business of the offender, nor for household use.
So context is key here, right?
Yeah.
Because I have a gas can in my garage for my lawnmower. If my garage burns down, does that automatically make me an arsonist?
No, of course not. Because gasoline is necessary for a lawnmower, and a garage is exactly where you'd expect to keep it. But let's say you run a bakery.
Okay. Flour is flammable, I guess, but I don't need gasoline.
Right. If you run a bakery and the investigators find gallons of kerosene that have been soaked into the drywall of the seating area, that is prima facie evidence, why on earth would a baker have kerosene in the dining room?
To make the croissants extra crispy. No, I see your point. It's about the substance being totally out of place.
Exactly. It's the anomaly. If you're a painter, having turpentine is normal. If you're a librarian, having 5 gallons of turpentine under your desk is, very suspicious.
The text also mentions mechanical, electrical, chemical, or electronic contrivances.
Right, the stuff trace. Timers, slow-burning fuses, any kind of rigged wiring that's designed to spark. Finding the remnants of a device that was designed to start a fire is, naturally, very strong evidence that the fire was planned.
Now, this next part is what I call the financial motive section. This is where the law gets right into the mind of the white-collar criminal. It talks about insurance.
And insurance fraud is a massive driver of arson cases, so PD 1613 addresses it head-on. Section 6, paragraph 4, lists over-insuring as a major red flag. If the building is insured for substantially more than its actual value, the law immediately becomes suspicious.
So if I have a little shack that's worth, say, 1 million pesos, but I go and insure it for 10 million.
The first question is why? Why would you pay the high premiums on a 10 million peso policy for a 1 million peso shack? It makes no financial sense unless, of course, you intend to cash it out. It's the classic selling the house to the insurance company scheme.
And Section 6.5 looks at your history. It says if the offender has had more than 2 fires in their properties during the lifetime of the insurance policy.
That establishes a pattern. 1 fire is a tragedy. 2 fires is really bad luck. 3 fires. That starts to look an awful lot like a business model.
Business model.
Yeah.
That's dark. But the one that really caught my attention, the real gotcha moment I mentioned in the intro, is Section 6. This one feels like something straight out of a detective novel.
Yes. The inventory clue.
The text says, if shortly before the fire, a substantial portion of the effects insured and stored in a building or property had been withdrawn from the premises except in the ordinary course of business.
This is all behavioral evidence. It dives right into the psychology of greed. So let's say you own a clothing warehouse. It's failing. You have 10 million pesos worth of designer jeans just sitting there. You decide to burn the warehouse for the insurance money.
Okay, so I'm going to torch it.
But you're greedy. You think to yourself, why should I burn the jeans? If I burn the jeans, I get the insurance money. But if I move the jeans out the back door first, I can sell the jeans on the black market and get the insurance money.
I want to have my cake and eat it too. Or I guess have my jeans and burn the warehouse too.
Exactly. And that is the tell. An accidental fire destroys everything, the structure and the contents inside. An arsonist often tries to save the valuables first.
Oh.
So the law says that if the warehouse is found to be empty of goods, but the structure burns to the ground, that is prima facie evidence of arson. It captures the premeditation.
It creates this really vivid image of the investigator checking the inventory logs and realizing, wait a minute, they shipped everything out on Tuesday night and the fire just happened to be on Wednesday morning.
It proves that the fire didn't start with the match. It started with the logistics. It started with the trucks pulling up to the loading dock in the middle of the night.
It's brilliant because it catches the criminal on their own greed. If they just burned the jeans along with everything else, they might have gotten away with it, but they just couldn't let go of the inventory. Okay, so we've covered the definition and the evidence. Now I want to look at the what again. We talked about museums and trains, but PD 1613 Section 3 has this section called Other Cases of Arson. And the specificity here is just wild. It seems to move away from buildings and more into the landscape itself.
It does. This section deals with properties that have a significant economic importance. It distinguishes between different types of agricultural and industrial assets.
It lists plantation, farm, pasture land, growing crop, grain field, orchard, bamboo grove, or forest.
Notice the specific inclusion of bamboo grove.
Yeah, why bamboo specifically? Why not, I don't know, oak trees or something?
In the Philippines, bamboo is a critical economic resource. It's used for construction, for furniture, for scaffolding, even for food. A bamboo grove isn't just a pretty garden, it's a factory of raw materials.
I see.
So burning a bamboo grove or a forest isn't just destroying plants. The law views it as a form of economic sabotage. You are destroying the livelihood of the community that depends on that harvest.
And then it lists industrial establishment, shipyard, oil well, or mine shaft.
An oil well or a mine shaft represents a massive capital investment and a vital national resource. Burning these carries the penalty of reclusion temporal to reclusion perpetua. It's treating the attack on industry as a severe crime against the state's economic stability.
Speaking of mines, we have a completely separate source here in our stack. Republic Act 7942, the Philippine Mining Act of 1995. Why does mining get its own special arson mention? Why wasn't the penal code enough?
It's Section 105 of the Mining Act, mines arson. It defines the crime as willfully setting fire to mineral stockpiles, mine workings, or fittings. And you have to consider the context of where mines are located.
You're usually really remote, up in the mountains somewhere.
Exactly. They are far from fire stations, they are far from police precincts, and they are often full of volatile chemicals used in the extraction process, like dynamite or cyanide. A fire in a mine is incredibly dangerous and very hard to contain.
So the act just reinforces it.
The Mining Act reinforces the penal code, but adds a specific layer regarding liability for damages. It emphasizes that you aren't just going to jail. You are paying compensation for the minerals and the infrastructure you destroyed.
It really shows how the law adapts to specific industries. Now, hold on. I found something in Article 324 of the revised penal code called crimes involving destruction. This seems to be the catch-all for when you destroy something without using fire.
Correct. Arson is specific to fire, but Article 324 covers widespread destruction via other means. It lists explosion, discharge of electric current, inundation, which means flooding sinking vessels, derailment of locomotives, or destroying telegraph wires.
Inundation. That sounds biblical, like Noah's Ark or something.
Think about a dam or a dike. If you sabotage a dam and deliberately flood a town, that falls under this article. You are weaponizing water.
And discharge of electric current. That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, maybe a supervillain plot.
It sounds exotic, but you can imagine someone overloading a power grid to blow up transformers, or electrifying a large body of water.
Or even just a fence.
If that fence endangers the safety of any person, yes, that's the key element in Article 324. These acts must endanger the safety of any person.
Okay.
If you flood an empty field and nobody is at risk, it might be a lesser crime, like malicious mischief. But if you flood a town where people live, it is a crime involving destruction under Article 324.
So it's about the scale of the force being used. Fire, water, electricity, explosion, these are elemental forces.
Exactly. And when a human being tries to wield them as weapons to cause destruction, the law steps in with severe penalties because individual victims just cannot defend themselves against a flood or an explosion.
This brings us to a really critical part of the discussion. How the punishment gets calculated. We've mentioned prison mare and reclusion perpetua, but there are these things called aggravating circumstances that can push the penalty to the maximum. It's like a video game multiplier, but for jail time.
That's a grim way to put it, but it's accurate. Aggravating circumstances are conditions surrounding the crime that increase the criminal liability. And PD 1613 Section 4 is very specific about this for arson.
The first one listed is intent to gain.
This connects right back to the insurance fraud we talked about. If you did it for money, the law has zero sympathy. The penalty is imposed in its maximum period.
Then there's benefit of another.
That's being a hired gun. If you didn't burn it for yourself, but you were paid to burn it for someone else, that is an aggravating circumstance. It targets the hitman aspect of arson.
Spite or hatred. This one feels personal.
It is. If the offender is motivated by spite or hatred towards the owner or the occupant, this covers all the vendetta fires. The jealous ex-lover, the disgruntled employee who just got fired. If the court finds that hatred was the driver, the penalty goes up.
And then the syndicate.
This is a term we hear a lot in news reports, right? Drug syndicate, kidnapping syndicate. Under PD 1613, a syndicate is defined quite simply.
How many people does it take to make a syndicate? 20? 50?
3.
Just 3. So me and 2 friends.
In the eyes of this decree, yes. If the crime is planned or carried out by a group of 3 or more persons, it is deemed to have been committed by a syndicate.
Why is 3 the magic number?
I think the logic is that 2 people is a partnership, but 3 people is an organization. It implies a higher level of planning, peer pressure, and capability. If 3 of you buy the gasoline and light the match, you're an arson syndicate, and the penalty hits the maximum.
Wow. We also had the general aggravating circumstances from the revised Penal Code in Article 14. These apply to all crimes, but they seem particularly nasty when you apply them to arson.
They do. Nighttime is a classic one.
Why does the time of day matter? Fire burns the same at noon as it does at midnight.
It matters because of the defenselessness of the victims. If you wait until dark to set the fire, you are using the cover of darkness to ensure your crime is successful and, more importantly, to make it harder for victims to wake up and escape.
So you're taking advantage of them while they're sleeping.
Yes. That aggravates the crime. It's seen as cowardly.
Legally and morally, yeah.
An uninhabited place is similar, using isolation to avoid detection.
But the one that really stood out to me was calamity. That's Article 14, Paragraph 7.
Yes. Committing the crime on the occasion of a conflagration, shipwreck, earthquake, epidemic, or other calamity.
That feels like pure evil. I mean, there's an earthquake, chaos is everywhere, buildings are falling, and you decide, you know what? Now's a good time to set a fire.
It's taking advantage of the absolute worst moments of human suffering. The police are busy, the fire department is overwhelmed. The law views this as a betrayal of basic humanity. When the community is at its most vulnerable and you use that chaos to commit a crime, the penalty is maximized. It's the looter mentality, but with destruction.
Okay, we need to address the elephant in the room. We've been mentioning the death penalty and heinous crimes. We are looking at Republic Act 7659. Now, I know the death penalty is a very hot-button issue. I know it has been suspended, reimposed, and then suspended again in the Philippines. But for this deep dive, we're looking at the text of the law as it is provided in our source stack.
Right. And we need to be clear about this. We are analyzing the statute as it is written and the rationale behind it. We are not debating the morality of capital punishment, but we are looking at why arson was included in it.
Right. RA 7659 is titled, An Act to Impose the Death Penalty on Certain Heinous Crimes. The whereas clauses in the intro of this act are just intense. It feels like the legislators were writing this in a state of panic or real anger. It talks about an alarming upsurge of crimes.
It describes these crimes as grievous, odious, and hateful offenses. The legislature at the time clearly felt that these specific crimes were repugnant and outrageous to the common standards and norms of decency.
And the stated goal in the text was to restore respect for the law and maintain peace and order.
That's what it says.
And arson, specifically destructive arson, is right there in the list.
Yes. Section 10 of RA 7659 amends Article 320 again, and it groups destructive arson with crimes like treason, piracy, and plunder. That shows you the level at which the state views this crime. It's not just a property crime. In this text, it is a capital offense.
The text specifies that if death results from the arson, the penalty is mandatory.
The phrasing in the last paragraph of Section 10 is very clear. If, as a consequence of the commission of any of the acts penalized under this article, death results, the mandatory penalty of death shall be imposed.
Mandatory.
That leaves zero wiggle room for a judge under this specific statute.
That was the intent of the law at that time. It implies that if you start a fire and someone dies, you have, in the eyes of this law, forfeited your own life.
There is also a specific mention of concealment here.
Yes. If the burning is for the purpose of concealing or destroying evidence of another violation of law, or for concealing bankruptcy.
So if I commit a murder,
you kill someone in a building,
and then I burn the house down to hide the body,
then you are hit with the full weight of the destructive arson law. The fire is seen not just as an act of destruction, but as a profound obstruction of justice. You are effectively committing a double atrocity: the murder itself, and then the destruction of the truth about the murder. It's heavy stuff. It really underlines that idea that fire is uncontrollable. Once you start it, you can't say, oh, I only meant to burn the rug. If that rug burns the house and kills someone, you are on the hook for the death.
Exactly. There is no oops in arson. You own the consequences of the element you unleashed.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. We've talked a lot about the arsonist, the singular bad guy. But crimes are rarely a solo act. We touched on syndicates, but let's break down the different roles. The revised Penal Code in Book 1, Title 2 classifies criminals into principals, accomplices, and accessories.
This is so crucial for understanding how the law nets everyone involved in the crime. It's kind of like the credits of a movie. You have the star, the co-star, and the extras.
Okay, let's start with the stars, the principals. That's Article 17.
Principals are the main actors. So those who take a direct part in the execution of the act, the person literally holding the match, but also those who directly force or induce others to commit it.
The mastermind. The mob boss who orders the hit but never touches the gasoline can.
Correct. He is a principal. And then there's a third type. Those who cooperate in the commission of the offense by another act without which it would not have been accomplished.
That's a bit of a mouthful. Can you give me an example of that?
Let's say you work as security at the warehouse, and you leave the back door unlocked specifically to let the arsonist in. Without you unlocking that door, they couldn't have gotten in. Your cooperation was indispensable.
So I'm a principal.
You are a principal, just as guilty as the guy with the match.
Okay. Now, accomplices, Article 18. These are the co-stars then.
Accomplices are those who cooperate by previous or simultaneous acts, but their participation isn't indispensable.
So what's the difference between the indispensable security guard and an accomplice?
Let's say the arsonist is going to burn a building. You agree to stand on the corner and act as a lookout for the police.
The lookout. Got it.
The arsonist probably could have burned the building without you. You helped, you made it easier, but you weren't essential. You are an accomplice. The penalty is slightly lower, but you are still going to jail for a long time.
And finally, the extras. The accessories, Article 19. These are the people who show up after the fire is already lit, right?
Right. Accessories typically do not participate in the planning or the execution of the crime. They come in subsequent to it, they have knowledge of it, and they take part in 3 specific ways.
Way number 1, profiting.
Profiting yourself or assisting the offender to profit by the effects of the crime. So helping them sell the scrap metal from the burned out building, for example.
Way number 2, concealing.
Concealing or destroying the body of the crime, the corpus delicti or the effects of the arson, or concealing the instruments. Imagine the arsonist runs to your house and says, "Here, hide these gas cans. If you hide them, you are an accessory."
And way number 3, harboring.
Harboring, concealing, or assisting in the escape of the principal. Driving the getaway car after the fact. Hiding the arsonist in your basement when the police come knocking on your door.
Now, this is where I found a really surprising, almost touching detail in the law. A moment of humanity in what is otherwise a very harsh code. Article 20. Accessories who are exempt from criminal liability.
This is often called the blood is thicker than water clause.
The law essentially says you can be an accessory, you can hide the criminal, you can help them escape, and you won't be punished if you are related to them.
Specifically, if you are the spouse, an ascendant like a parent or grandparent, a descendant like a child, or a legitimate natural or adopted brother or sister.
That is fascinating. The law acknowledges that if my brother shows up at my door covered in soot and says, "I just burned down a building, you have to hide me," my instinct as a brother to protect him is so biological, so primal, that the state won't actually punish me for it.
It recognizes the incredible strain that puts on human nature. It effectively says, we cannot expect you to turn in your own child or your own spouse. It would be unnatural to demand that. So law gives you a pass for harboring them. However,
There's always a however.
there is a major catch. You are exempt from liability for concealing them or helping them escape, but you are not exempt if you profited from the crime.
Ah, so the love must be pure.
Exactly. If my brother shows up and says, "I burned the building to get the insurance money, hide me, and I'll give you half the cash," and I take that money,
Then the exemption is gone.
it's gone. Greed overrides the family bond exemption. You are now liable as an accessory. You cross the line from being a loyal brother to being a criminal partner.
That is such a nuanced piece of legislation. It allows for love, but it draws the line at profit.
Precisely. It keeps the moral compass intact.
So we've covered the jail time, we've covered the death penalty, but what about the wallet? Arson is expensive. You aren't just destroying a building, you're destroying immense value.
Civil liability. In the Philippines, every person criminally liable for a felony is also civilly liable. That's Article 100.
Meaning you have to pay for what you broke?
Restitution and reparation. That's Articles 104 to 107. You have to pay for the damage caused. But it gets more complicated than just the market value of the property. Article 106 mentions something really interesting. Sentimental value.
Really? You can actually charge for sentimental value. I thought that was just a figure of speech.
No, it's right there in the code. The court can determine the amount of damage, taking into consideration the special sentimental value of the article to the injured party.
How do you even put a price on that if I burn down an ancestral home?
It's not just the market price of the wood and the stone. It's the history. It's the photo albums. It's the grandfather's rocking chair that was passed down through generations. The law allows the judge to factor that emotional loss into the financial penalty.
And what about consequential damages?
That's about indemnifying family members or third parties who suffered. If the breadwinner of a family is killed in the fire, the arsonist isn't just liable for the death. They are liable for the lost income of that family for years and years to come.
But there is one final penalty that seems like the ultimate financial hit. It's in PD 1613, Section 8, confiscation of object of arson. This sounds like the nuclear option for property owners.
This is the Heron drop. The decree states, the building which is the object of arson, including the land on which it is situated, shall be confiscated and escheated to the state.
Wait, pause. The land.
The land.
So if I burn down my own warehouse to cheat the insurance company, the government doesn't just put me in jail, they take the scorched earth underneath it too.
Yes. The land is escheated, meaning it reverts to the state.
Why go that far?
It is designed to completely remove the incentive for arson for profit. Imagine a developer who has a historic building on a prime piece of real estate. They can't tear it down because it's protected, so they hire someone to burn it down, thinking, oops, what a tragedy, now I have a nice empty lot to build a skyscraper on.
A very cynical, very profitable plan.
This law says, no, if you burn it, you lose the lot too. It kills the profit motive completely dead. You end up with absolutely nothing.
That creates a huge risk. But what if I'm the innocent landlord? What if I rent my warehouse to a tenant, and the tenant is the crazy one who burns it down? Do I lose my land because my tenant is an arsonist?
And that is the terrifying question for landlords. The law offers an exception. It says, unless the owner thereof can prove that he has no participation in nor knowledge of such arson, despite the exercise of due diligence on his part.
Despite the exercise of due diligence. That sounds like a really tough burden of proof.
It is. The burden shifts to the owner. You
Right.
have to prove you didn't know and that you were being careful. If you were negligent, or if you just turned a blind eye to your tenant storing gallons of gasoline, you could theoretically lose the land.
So if I'm a landlord, I better be doing my inspections.
Absolutely. Ignorance is not a defense if you weren't diligent.
So let's try to summarize this entire journey. We've gone from simple arson, which is already 6 to 12 years of your life,
Yeah.
to destructive arson, which targets our history, our safety, and our transit systems.
Yeah.
We've learned that two fires starting at the same time is basically a confession written in ash. We've learned that the law protects bamboo groves and oil wells with a specific kind of ferocity. We've learned that if you help your brother escape, the law forgives you. But if you take his money, the law nails you. And we've learned that if you burn your property for profit, the government might just take the very land you stand on.
That is a very fair summary. The overarching theme of all these laws, from the revised penal code to the presidential decrees, is the recognition of fire as a uniquely dangerous weapon.
It's not like a knife or a gun. You can aim a gun. You can't really aim a fire once it gets going.
Exactly. Fire doesn't discriminate. The moment you light that match, you lose control. The wind changes direction, and the neighbor's house burns down. The structure collapses unexpectedly, and a firefighter dies. Because the offender abdicates control to the elements, the law imposes the strictest possible control on the offender.
It's a sobering deep dive. We started by saying fire is chemically simple, just oxidation, but the human consequences are absolutely massive.
And the legal consequences are designed to match that scale.
Before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We talked about the prima facie evidence, specifically that inventory section, Section 6.
The pre-fire withdrawal of goods.
Yes. The idea that the crime is proven by what happened before the fire. It makes you think. Next time you see a major fire in the news, a warehouse, a factory, a big shopping mall, and you see the investigation start, don't just look at the ashes. Don't just look for the melted wires.
Look at the books.
Look at the logs. Look at the insurance policy adjustments that were made a month prior. Look at the shipping manifest from the night before the fire. The law suggests that the fire often starts long before the match is even struck. It starts in the planning. It starts in the quiet withdrawal of assets. The fire is just the final act of a play that was written weeks in advance in a ledger.
That is a chilling but legally accurate way to put it. The paper trail burns a lot slower than the building.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive into Philippine arson law. It's been intense, but hopefully you'll look at that flickering candle a little differently tonight. Stay safe.
Welcome to the debate. You know, when most people think about arson, they probably picture a solitary figure, a can of gasoline, and a match. It's a crime of property, right? At its core, a way to cheat an insurance company or maybe settle a grudge.
Right.
But the Philippine legal framework, it views fire very differently. It sees fire as a weapon of mass destruction. We're analyzing a set of laws today, specifically the interplay between Presidential Decree 1613 and Article 320 of the Revised Penal Code that treat arson not just as criminal damage, but as a crime so heinous, it historically triggered the mandatory death penalty.
And that is exactly where the legal paradox begins. I mean, we are looking at a system that relies on prima facie evidence, where the condition of the crime scene itself is used to legally presume your guilt, and a penal code that is, well, arguably suffering from an identity crisis. It retains the language of capital punishment, even lethal injection, despite those penalties being legally prohibited.
So, the central question we're tackling today is this. Does this aggressive legal framework, which assumes guilt based on how a fire starts and categorizes syndicates with extreme prejudice, does it effectively protect society from chaos, or does it create a dangerous legal minefield where the innocent can be crushed by presumptions?
I'm taking the position that the law is dangerously broad. When you have a statute that can turn a family business dispute into a capital offense, and where the text of the law promises a punishment the state is forbidden to carry out, you don't have security. You have legal schizophrenia.
And I am arguing the opposite. Arson, by its very nature, destroys the evidence needed to prosecute it. The strict codification of destructive arson, the inclusion of organized syndicates, and these evidentiary presumptions, they are absolute necessities. They are really the only tool strong enough to protect the nation's stability from a crime that is designed to be unsolvable.
Well, let's get into it. Okay.
Let's start with the foundation of why this law is so aggressive. We really need to look at the legislative intent here. If you look at the preamble of Republic Act 7569, which is the law that amended the Revised Penal Code to restore the death penalty for heinous crimes, it doesn't mince words. It classifies these offenses as grievous, odious, and hateful. It argues that these crimes undermine the people's faith in the government and its ability to maintain peace.
Odious and hateful, and certainly strong rhetoric, but we have to ask, does the punishment actually fit the mechanics of the crime?
In the context of the Philippines, I'd say yes. You have to remember the density of our urban environments. A fire in a dense metro area isn't just a property crime, it's an attack on the social infrastructure. And Article 320, as amended, it defines destructive arson by the scale of the target. We aren't just talking about burning a shed. The law specifically lists trains, hospitals, museums, and buildings of public ownership. And funnily enough, airships.
Airships. That feels, very specific for a penal code.
It is specific, but it highlights the intent, protecting state assets and mass transit. When someone burns a hospital or a train, they're attacking the functioning of the state. That is why the penalty is reclusion perpetua, essentially life imprisonment, all the way up to death. It recognizes that fire is an instrument of great waste and ruin, to borrow phrasing from the murder statutes. It's a proportional response to what is essentially an act of terror.
Okay, I understand the terror aspect and the need to protect hospitals. I get that. But my concern is the mechanism used to get those convictions. You mentioned the unsolvable nature of arson. The Philippine solution to that problem, specifically in Presidential Decree number 1613, Section 6, is to shift the burden of proof.
Well, it bridges the evidentiary gap. It doesn't just shift it arbitrarily.
Section 6 establishes prima facie evidence. For the listeners, prima facie literally means at first sight. In court, it means the evidence is sufficient to prove the case unless the accused can strongly disprove it. Under this law, if you possess flammable substances that are not necessary for the business, that is prima facie evidence of arson.
Which is logical, isn't it? If you run a bookstore and the police find 50 gallons of gasoline in the back room, that warrants a presumption of intent. There's no logical business reason for a bookseller to hoard accelerants.
But who defines necessary? That's the slippery slope. What if I run a hardware store, or a mechanic shop, or an art studio that uses solvents? Suddenly the line between inventory and criminal evidence becomes a matter of opinion. But it gets worse. Section 6 also says that if, shortly before the fire, a substantial portion of the effects insured has been withdrawn, that is evidence of guilt.
Again, that's just logic. If you empty your warehouse of all its valuable stock 3 hours before it burns down, you are signaling foreknowledge. You're saving the goods while trying to claim the insurance on the loss. It's a classic fraud scheme.
Or maybe you were fulfilling a large order. Maybe you were moving locations. The problem is that the law takes circumstantial behavior, inventory management, and elevates it to hard evidence of a heinous crime. And in a system where the penalties are this severe, potentially life in prison or death, shifting the burden onto the accused to prove they were planning a fire is terrifying. You're effectively guilty until you can prove you were just moving boxes.
But you have to view this through the lens of the syndicates. The preamble of PD 1613 explicitly states that fires in Metro Manila and other urban centers were being perpetrated by criminal syndicates, some of which have foreign connections. The law isn't targeting the accidental hardware store fire. It's designed to break organized crime rings that use arson for insurance fraud or economic destabilization.
I'm glad you brought up the syndicates, because that's my second major point of contention. The definition is incredibly loose for something that carries such heavy consequences.
It seems fairly standard to me. It defines a group acting in concert.
Under PD 1613, Section 4, a syndicate is defined as a group of 3 or more persons. That's it. 3 people. It doesn't require a hierarchy, a mafia initiation, or those foreign connections the preamble warned us about.
But 3 people conspiring to commit a crime is a syndicate?
But look at the disparity in consequences. If a father and his 2 adult sons decide to burn their failing shop to collect insurance, they are, legally speaking, a syndicate. Under the law, they face the maximum penalty. Contrast that with a duo, 2 people, doing the exact same thing. They don't trigger the syndicate clause. Does the addition of 1 person really warrant jumping to the highest rung of criminal liability? It feels arbitrary.
It's not arbitrary. It's about the multiplication of force. Organized arson requires a division of labor, a lookout, an igniter, a planner. By setting the bar at 3 people, the law acknowledges that group dynamics make the crime more dangerous and harder to stop. It prevents the diffusion of responsibility. A group of 3 operates with a level of confidence and capability that a solo actor or a pair often lacks. The law treats that group as a single, dangerous entity.
It feels like a net designed to catch sharks that ends up catching minnows. And speaking of nets, we have to talk about the confusion between simple and destructive arson. This is where the rubber meets the road in the courtroom.
The distinction is clear in the statutes. Destructive is about public peril. Simple is about property.
Is it, though? Let's look at the overlap. Article 320, the harsh one, punishes the burning of any building where people usually gather. That triggers reclusion perpetua to death. But then look at PD 1613, Section 3, which covers other cases of arson. It specifically lists burning an inhabited house. That carries a lesser penalty, reclusion temporale to reclusion perpetua.
A house is private. A gathering place is public. That seems like a reasonable line to draw.
But a home is literally the primary place where people gather. If I burn down a large apartment complex, a housing tenement as listed in Section 2 of PD 1613, is that a Section 2 case, so prison time, or is it an Article 320 case, the death penalty one, because people usually gather there?
I think the distinction lies in the public utility. Article 320 is protecting the collective. It lists hotels, markets, transient dwellings. These are places where the public relies on safety. A private home, while tragic, does not disrupt the social order in the same way. A tenement falls under PD 1613 because it's residential, whereas a hotel falls under Article 320 because it's a public accommodation.
I think you're giving the prosecutor too much credit. This ambiguity allows them to charge up. They can look at a burning apartment building and decide to file it under Article 320 to seek the death penalty, or under PD 1613 for a lighter sentence. The crime is the same. The statute is chosen based on how heinous they want to make it look. And let's not forget mine's arson.
Right. Under Republic Act 7942.
Exactly. Section 105 of that act treats burning a mineral stockpile as arson. That shows how the definition of arson shifts to protect specific industries. If you burn a rice mill, specifically mentioned in PD 1613, you face reclusion temporal. But if you burn a warehouse under Article 320, which is devoted to the service of public utilities, you face death. What is a rice mill if not a warehouse for food? The categorization depends entirely on how the prosecutor frames the building's function.
The difference is strategic importance. A private rice mill is an economic asset, yes, but a warehouse for public utilities supports the grid, the water supply, the infrastructure. The law protects the collective over the individual. This is consistent with the protection of the national economy cited in the preamble of PD 1613. The state is saying, do not touch the infrastructure. If you burn the grid, you hurt everyone. If you burn a rice mill, you hurt the miller and his customers.
And to ensure you don't touch the infrastructure, they threaten you with a ghost. We have to talk about the death penalty. This is the elephant in the room.
It's not a ghost. It is the maximum penalty prescribed by law.
It is a zombie law. Look at the 2020 text of the revised Penal Code. Article 81 is still sitting there. It says, the death sentence shall be executed with preference to any other, and shall consist in putting the person under sentence to death by lethal injection. It directs the director of the Bureau of Corrections to ensure the injection causes instantaneous death. It's right there, black and white, in the current code.
But there is a parenthetical note, correct?
Yes, acknowledging that Republic Act 9346 prohibits the imposition of the death penalty. But that's my point. The code defines the crime, destructive arson, as punishable by death. It defines the method, lethal injection. It defines the timeline, but it cannot be enforced. This isn't just a technicality, it's a failure of legal certainty. A judge reads Article 320 and sees death, but knows they cannot impose it. It creates a false expectation of justice for victims and a confusing standard of liability for the accused.
I see it differently. The retention of the language serves a hierarchy. Even if the penalty cannot be carried out due to RA 9346, the fact that the revised Penal Code retains death in Article 71's scale of penalties signals to the judiciary and the public that this crime is at the apex of criminality. It's a statement of moral weight. It tells society this is the worst thing you can do.
A legal code shouldn't be a statement of moral weight. It should be a manual for justice. Leaving unimplemented penalties on the books invites abuse. What happens if the political winds change? The machinery is already there. The lethal injection statute hasn't been repealed, it's just suspended by another act. And look at Article 47. It even details the automatic review by the Supreme Court for death penalty cases. We are maintaining an entire appellate infrastructure for a penalty that doesn't exist.
And perhaps that's the point. It acts as the ultimate deterrent, suspended but visible. And we must remember the triggers for this penalty. Article 320 doesn't just apply to burning a building. It applies when death results from the arson or when the burning is of an arsenal, a shipyard, or a military powder factory.
Sure, burning an arsenal is an act of war. I grant you that.
Exactly. The law views these acts as bordering on treason. If you burn a military powder factory, you are not a simple arsonist. You are an enemy of the state. My position stands by the idea that the law must reflect the severity of the threat. If you compromise the nation's ability to defend itself, the maximum penalty, even if symbolic, is appropriate.
But the law doesn't just target enemies of the state. It targets the negligent owner. Have you looked closely at Section 8 of PD 1613? Confiscation of object of arson.
Yes, escheatment. The property reverts to the state.
The building and the land are escheated, meaning forfeited to the state, unless the owner can prove they had no participation. Again, a reversal of presumption. You'll lose your land unless you can prove your innocence.
Only if the owner cannot prove absence of participation despite exercise of due diligence. This prevents the arsonist from profiting from the land value. Historically, people would burn their dilapidated buildings to sell the empty lot for a premium. Section 8 says, no. If you burn it to clear it, the state takes the lot. It removes the profit motive entirely.
But consider the wording, despite exercise of due diligence. If I fail to guard my property, if I am just lazy or negligent, and a syndicate burns it, do I lose my land to the state? because I wasn't diligent enough? The phrasing suggests I might. It punishes the victim for being imperfect. It essentially says, you let your building burn, so now it's ours.
I think you're reading the most uncharitable interpretation possible. The law targets those who are complicit. It's about closing loopholes. Arson is a crime of loopholes, burned evidence, insurance fraud, land speculation. The law has to be a sledgehammer because the problem was out of control.
And now we're left with a sledgehammer in a room full of glass.
Let's go back to the prima facie issue, specifically the physics of it. You dismissed Section 6 earlier, but consider the simultaneous fires provision.
If the fire starts in more than one place at once?
Correct. Section 6 states that if the fire started simultaneously in more than one part of the building, that is prima facie evidence of arson. That is simply physics. Fires don't naturally start in the kitchen and the attic at the exact same second unless they were set. Why is that a dangerous presumption?
Because simultaneous is a matter of perception and forensics, which can be flawed. But more importantly, it's the other presumptions that worry me. We talked about the inventory, but look at the insurance provision. If the insurance policy is for substantially more than the actual value, that is evidence of arson.
Again, motive. Why would you pay premiums on a policy that is double the value of the building unless you intend to cash it out?
Or bad valuation, or inflation, or maybe I just want it to be safe, or maybe the insurance agent upsold me? The law assumes that being overinsured makes you a criminal in waiting. It criminalizes economic caution.
It flags economic anomalies. In the aggregate, people do not overinsure unless they expect a payout. The law deals in probabilities.
Criminal laws should deal in beyond reasonable doubt, not probabilities.
But arson is unique. We keep coming back to this. The fire consumes the proof. If we demand the same standard of direct evidence as we do for, say, a robbery, where the camera footage survives, we would never convict an arsonist. The law effectively says, the circumstances surrounding the fire are the evidence.
And I maintain that circumstantial evidence should be the start of an investigation, not the end of the burden of proof, especially when we consider the spite clause.
The aggravating circumstance?
Yes. Section 4 of PD 1613. Motivated by spite or hatred towards the owner. That elevates the penalty. But isn't spite the motive for almost every crime that isn't financial? In a country where land disputes and personal vendettas are common, elevating spite to a special aggravating circumstance is incredibly broad. It pushes a neighborhood feud into the realm of heinous crimes.
Spite implies a malicious intent that goes beyond just making money. It implies a desire to cause suffering. And when you choose fire as your weapon to inflict that suffering, a weapon that can jump to the neighbor's house and kill a child sleeping in the next room, the law treats that malice as a public danger. It's saying that personal hatred does not give you the right to endanger the entire block.
We are circling back to the core disagreement. You trust the text to be applied with restraint. You trust that the prosecutor won't use the syndicate rule on a family or the spite rule on a neighbor.
I trust that the law provides the tools necessary to handle the worst-case scenarios.
And I look at the text, specifically the zombie death penalty and the prima facie guilt, and I see a recipe for wrongful conviction. The machinery is just too big, too sharp, and too loose.
To bring this to a close, my position remains that the severity of the Philippine laws on arson, from the specific protection of trains and museums in Article 320 to the evidentiary rules in PD 1613, is a necessary response to the unique danger of fire. Fire is a weapon of mass destruction on a local scale. The law must be severe because the crime is uncontrollable once unleashed.
And I maintain that while the crime is indeed terrible, the legal framework is messy and dangerous. Relying on prima facie presumptions threatens the innocent by shifting the burden of proof based on circumstantial behaviors like moving inventory. Furthermore, retaining the death penalty in the text while prohibiting it in practice creates a confusing standard that undermines the rule of law. We need clarity and due process, not just deterrence.
It is a complex web of intent, ownership, and public safety.
Where the difference between a prison sentence and a capital conviction hangs on the definition of a building, or the presence of two other people.
That brings us to the end of this examination. Thank you for listening to the debate.